Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about Secret Project number 3, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. So of course we're going to go ahead and cover this with a non-spoilery section at first with some generic thoughts and opinions. Then we're going to jump into spoilers where I can talk in more detail. So as always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is book number 3 of the Secret Projects for the year of Sanderson. This one, we are also going back into the Cosmere, which I'm really excited about because, love me some Cosmere. And this one, though, is different than some of the other stories Brandon has written. This one is explicitly a romance story. It is purely about a couple getting together in these interesting circumstances. So it's kind of something Brandon's not, he's basically admitted that he's not, perfect at or whatever. It's not one of his strongest skill suits in his writing repertoire. So it's really interesting to see that he's taken the opportunity with these secret projects, or he did take the opportunity to work on some of his skills that he considers to be slightly weaker in his writing. So I really like that idea. Also, I think this is a really good example of what we might see in the future because before Brandon has mentioned that he might need to have some people like co-write or ghostwrite some Cosmere stuff for him later because his plans for it are so expansive and so time consuming that he probably wouldn't be able to write them all himself and, live. He's probably going to like do more like Cosmere filler, I guess, if that'll be a more appropriate term that other people can co-write or write on their own. So I imagine that'll be stories much like this one and much like Tress, where it takes place on a world off the beaten path of the regular Cosmere that has nothing to do with the War of the Surges or any Shardic conflicts or anything like that, and it's just kind of worlds that are couched in the mechanics of the Cosmere. So I think it'll be more of this kind of stuff. At least that's where I would be more comfortable where all the other writers could play with because I just really don't want anyone to touch Mistborn or Stormlight or anything like that except for Brandon. So yeah, I mean, but if he needs to prioritize those and let other people write other stuff, I'd be okay with that. So yeah. So Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is about these two characters who are brought together even though they exist across different spanses of reality. Where basically they believe that they live in two separate worlds. Where in the Nightmare Painter's world, Nikaro is his name. He is what is known as a nightmare painter. So in this world, they live in the world of basically perpetual night. There is no sunlight because their entire world, as far as they understand, is surrounded in this thing they call the shroud, which is this dark, amorphous, basically pure investiture essence that surrounds all their cities and things like that. So there's no light that comes through. The only light they see is the star of this one planet that somehow penetrates the darkness of the shroud when no other stars or planets or suns or anything like that can. So that's already interesting. But their main source of light is what they call heon lines. They are teal and magenta lights, much like the lighting in my room. They are it's very hard to explain without going into spoilers, so we'll save that explanation for a spoilery section. But they use these Heon lines to power a lot of their technology because in this world where Nikaro lives, they have advanced technology. They have like instant ramen and they have TVs and telenovelas. I mean, I guess not telenovelas, whatever the Japanese ish equivalent of soap operas are if they have a name like telenovelas. But yes, so they have very modern stuff. So the job that Nikaro does in this world, he is a nightmare painter. So the shroud, this amorphous amount of investiture, essentially takes on the thoughts and impressions of people, mostly at night when they're sleeping because that's when their minds are like unaware. But it takes on their nightmares, their bad dreams, their worst impulses. So these shrouds can basically pull like nightmares can pull out of the shroud and manifest itself as a nightmare. But more often than not, they're non corporeal and they're just very harmless. They're just kind of a nuisance. So Nightmare Painter will take that, will basically focus on that nightmare and basically force a different impression on it. They will see it as something else and paint it out, and then using that, similar to the way cognitive creatures are formed by humans' impressions in the physical world, they will force an impression on the nightmare and force it to transform into something harmless. And Nikaro's main thing, his specialty is like bamboo. Like he can turn pretty much anything into bamboo, and it's kind of caused this level of apathy for his job because he kind of found out you don't have to be ridiculously creative all the time. You don't have to like make masterpieces to trap these nightmares. Bamboo works. Just, some stalks of bamboo. It works just as well as anything else. So as a result, he's kind of left in this apathetic state about his art, his personal passion towards his art, and about his job in general. So that's kind of where we meet this character. So Yumi, our other character that we meet, she is in a world that is essentially a like I don't know, hot plate. The ground itself is almost boiling hot. They have to wear these very thick wooden clogs in order to not burn their feet by walking on the ground. And they have these things called cool springs where it's the only source of like cooler water because everything is so insanely hot. Their sun seems to be much closer to the planet because it's gigantic and it like throws off colors that we wouldn't recognize on Earth or probably even on Roshar. It would be completely more like red kind of light as described in the story. So it's kind of really interesting. And her job in her society, she is what is the what is that? It's such a it sounds like a horn eater word. It is she is the I can't even think now my brain is just trying to say huma huma nuka nuka pua. But she is the Yoki Hiju. Yes, the Yoki Hiju. She is considered to be the chosen. An omen was basically seen around the time of her birth, and it basically foretells that she is going to be the one with enough artistic ability to call the spirits because in their land is very harsh. Their plants and stuff float very high in the air, so it's very hard to keep track of their crops. The ground, of course, is very hot and stuff, so it's just a very, very difficult place to live. So they summon these spirits, which are essentially Spren. I think they're essentially creation Spren because the way she summons them, she stacks rocks in an artistic way. And that artistic expression is interesting enough for these spirits, these Spren, to manifest themselves and show themselves to her. And she can essentially trade, it's not clear what it is, but she gives something of herself to them in exchange for them to transform themselves into a device that helps the society live more easily. And it's really interesting conceptually because it's very similar to Spren turning into like shard blades or fabrial stuff or anything like that. So it's just a really interesting, romantic kind of concept. So within this story, these two characters that are living very different lives and what seems like completely different timelines have these two really interesting kind of fantastical, magical based jobs, which I think under any other circumstance would be really fascinating and really interesting to talk about and think about and stuff. But in this story, they both are in a situation where, like, Nikadoro finds his job very kind of bland a little bit. He's kind of lost his passion for his art and the way that it connects to his job. And Yumi is basically tired of this position that she's been in since birth that is very rigid, has a lot of rules and stuff, and she's basically not allowed to go outside of it, even though she's supposed to be the one in charge. But they've mastered this level of manipulation to where they make her basically reject her own extra impulses or her own desires. So she's just highly stifled and stuff, and she just really would like to be a regular person. So one of the times when she is summoning the spirits basically ask her for help because they are trapped somehow, and we don't really understand how they're trapped. But she basically agrees to help, and then they form a spirit bond connection between Nikaro and Yumi. So now they both are spiritually connected, and they swap for 10 hours a day. So for 10 hours, Nikaro lives in the body of Yumi and basically has to exist in her like job and her life and position. And for 10 hours, Yumi transfers over to Nikaro's world, but she keeps her body and she basically gets to experience life there. So this interaction between them essentially is the thing that formulates their romantic relationship, and we kind of understand the world that's going on around it as all this stuff plays out. So while all that seems really, really cool, this idea that they'll be probably having to work together to fight nightmares and stuff like Nikoro has to do in his job, or like they'll have to try to figure out stuff that's going on at Yumi's village and everything to figure out these mysteries and stuff. A lot of that seems really, really cool, and I really like it. The parts that are laid out here for this story are really, really good. But for me, the sum of these parts are not that great. Some of the situations that these characters are in and how they feel about each other or about themselves does not, in my opinion, lend itself for a compelling romance. The thing that drops the ball in this book is sadly one of the main things of it. It's the romance. For me, it just does not connect because having characters fall in love through understanding their jobs does not connect on a character level that well for me. So that's probably my biggest issue with it. But that, I mean, while that is a very core issue with the book, I think, like I said, the parts that are here that are put on display are so interesting and so much fun. We get this story again is told through Hoyt's perspective. It's told, another story Hoyt is telling, and we kind of get a little bit more hints about stuff that's been going on in the Cosmere and like all this kind of stuff. So that's a lot of fun, and I really, really enjoy that a lot. And it's just a lot of fun. I like the pieces that are here more than I like the total picture that's painted with those pieces, I guess. But another thing about this book that leaves me like in a very, going back and forth kind of feeling of it, the in text illustrations, the art inside the ebook is like amazing. Oh my God. I love the Eastern influence in the story. I love the Eastern influence in the art. I just love how it all works. It looks so cool. It's so beautifully done, and it's just kind of brilliant. I want to do a couple versions of some of these illustrations in my art style just to get my hands on the composition of it because it's so nice. But it just leaves me of two minds so completely. The story itself does not come together, but all the pieces in it I love and adore, and I think they're just so much fun to pick apart and play with. So I just really, really like it. So let's go ahead and jump over spoilers so I can talk in a little bit more detail about the issues that I had. Also, before we get into spoilers, this is definitely going to be a part one. I want to do another video talking about the realmatics that are explored in this story, as well as just the art and what I think Brandon is saying about art in this book. I really, really like the message that I kind of picked up on it. Granted, it could all be in my head, but I really like the message of, from the art perspective, and I do want to talk about that as well. So make sure you stay tuned because there'll be another video about this book coming up. Actually, two more videos at least coming up about this book, either this week or probably next week as well. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to check that out. So yes, let's go ahead and get into spoilers. All right, spoilers. So first thing I want to talk about in the spoiler section is, of course, the romance again. I want to kind of talk about the coupling. So we were basically led to believe in the beginning of the book that they're on two different planets. So that, to me, settled me in this place of they can't be together. As well as later on, when we learn a bit more information, it seems like they're in two totally different timelines, which, again, made me feel like they can't be together. And then there's this other part in the story where they've been watching these dramas because Yumi really likes the soap operas. They really started to get into them and watching them weekly. And the main one that she's really into, it ends tragically, where one of the characters is a Ronin, and he basically leaves at the end of their courtship, kind of, and like abandons her. And she's like really sad about it, and it's a really sad thing. To me, that was a direct hint that this couple was not going to be able to be together. And I thought it would have worked a little better as this tragic could have been, this tragic loss of potential because of these insane circumstances they live in. But Brandon kind of just said, nah, skip it, they'll be together. And the way they're together, I don't really like. So it's just, it's interesting. So, one of my biggest issues with the way the romance is handled in this book is the fact that both characters see their fantastical job as something kind of mundane. Yumi is over her responsibilities and she just really wants to be a regular person. And Nikaro is feeling very pessimistic and very kind of just down, and his passion levels for his art are just very low. So when we go into a situation where they're basically teaching each other about their positions, I would expect the person learning about this position to be intrigued and interested enough that that intrigue and interest would carry over to the reader and therefore get me really interested in it. But it doesn't. It just comes across as neither one of them like their job. So why should I care about their job when they're trying to teach it to each other? So these characters being my connection to the world and the connection to these positions, their feelings towards these positions is going to be the feelings that I have. She feels hyper stifled and just like feels trapped and basically secluded and can barely like appreciate the interest of what she's doing because she's so stifled and sequestered. Like, so it's hard for me to feel any appreciation for what she's doing and how interesting it is that this is happening and what type of bond is this and what like realmatics of it and stuff like that. So it's hard for me to be interested in it because she just wants to be regular. And then it's really hard for me to get into Nikaro's position because his position is so tied into just his love of art that his apathy with his own art at this point lends itself to being apathetic to his job, especially since he realizes, oh, I don't have to be that creative all the time. I can just use bamboo every time, and it like still gets the job done. So how am I supposed to be passionate or that interested in this job that he's whittled down to essentially just stamping a piece of paper or something? So it makes the whole thing fall apart. And the fact that the romance is couched in that interaction to me, like it does not make for romance. Teaching someone about your job, even if that job is tied to your personality, does not lend itself to sparking a romantic relationship in my mind. It just doesn't. So I feel like I missed chapters or something where they made a personal connection and I just missed it somehow, but I totally didn't. I even like reread it. Like so I'm just confused as to like how this works. But in the postscript, Brandon also mentions that this is directly a reference to an anime, and well, the anime is an adaptation of a specific manga, and like this is a similar dynamic that existed there, but it's slightly different because different story. So I'm kind of interested in that. Maybe I'll look for that anime and see how that plays. I'm wondering if it's some of the Eastern influence that I'm just not picking up with, like in terms of the romance or something. Is it just something I'm missing? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyone who's like really into romance stories and like love stories and stuff, how does this land for you? Does this stuff work for you in the way that it just didn't for me? What am I missing in it? Please just kind of help me see it because I really very much wanted to go into this book to understand it on its terms and not go into it with all my hyper adventuring Cosmere expectations. I tend to like bring a lot of baggage into especially Cosmere books that I'm really trying to not do because it is influencing how I can enjoy it. Because I really do believe that you need to enjoy a story on its terms, not your own. So please let me know in the comments down below how this landed for you. Do you agree with me that these characters having a mundane opinion about their jobs does not lend to a personal connection that well? Or do you disagree with that? Let me know about it in the comments down below. But apart from the romance part of the story, again, I said the romantics and a lot of the different things that we explore in this story are really interesting. The story is again being told by Hoyd, and we now in this story, Design is with him, and there is some interesting things that he just drops in the context of what he's talking about. That's just kind of mind blowing. Like the fact that Design is on a completely different planet and she has a physical body that's not an illusion, and Hoyd just kind of offhandedly remarks that like yeah we tried that or we dealt with that thing with the spren and bodies and we know not to make that mistake anymore and whatnot. And like I'm like okay, so that whole thing from Rhythm of War just it gets taken care of course. And then like the ability to get her off of Roshar, dealing with her connection to the planet and stuff, they're like it was really hard to do but we figured out how to do it. I'm like so okay, that gets solved later. And then in Nikaro's world, and well, they're all on the same planet. They are just separated by time, and the entire way that works is romantically fascinating to like no end. But they're to the point where they're using their Heon lines to power spaceships so that they can go see what's up at the star that penetrates through the shroud, which is another planet. So they're getting to space travel. So I assume this has to be like Mistborn Era 4 timeline area or something like that because the holy crap technology Batman like the whole thing is just like insane. So there's just like a lot of stuff in it, and then of course there's an interesting Sanderlanche in here. So there's a situation that culminates with they've been searching for a nightmare that the more the nightmares come into the real world and feed on people's dreams, the more they can stabilize and become physical presences. So they end up having to fight what is essentially an army of stable nightmares. And it's a really interesting visual. The idea of this almost painting circle of like 30 something artists all painting in order to try to trap these investiture monsters and stuff is really cool. But when I think about it on a mechanical level, I have to add in pieces to the way it works in order for it not to like fall apart. Because the idea that these monsters are just casually waiting to be drawn and like trapped in another form just it feels I don't know. So basically my question is like while they're sitting there half freaked out in a circle and start to paint, why aren't these things slashing at them and killing them? One person does die, another couple people does get injured, but I think this thing that's not well described in the book must happen. So, like when when a nightmare painter is about to start painting one of the nightmares, they effectively, when they focus on that nightmare, I think it freezes it. So if they have its attention, it kind of freezes it. That's the only way it works for them not to be getting attacked mid drawing or like halfway through drawing or whatever. So it's a really interesting situation that happens. But the thing that kind of also kind of breaks my brain a little bit is at the end when they figure out the shroud is really just the separated souls and basically all the different parts of a person has been turned into investiture by this machine that was created 1700 years ago that was essentially supposed to do Yumi's job because Yumi is from 1700 years ago when before that society advanced all the way to the point of having soap operas. Um, so at that time they were trying to basically have a machine that would take the place of the the spirit caller person, and effectively they gave it like an AI command that was basically saying take in investiture, meaning the spirits take in that and then use it to like power itself or whatever to be perpetual. But they didn't realize that their souls and what they are is also made of investiture. So when they turned it on, it started to split the souls and the people and stuff and created this huge investiture miasma situation. So essentially, when it's all fixed, all those bodies basically they get kind of reconstituted, but it's been 1700 years, so they're dead, I guess. So they all start to go off into the beyond and whatnot. But at the very end, Nikaro is able to use his like nightmare painter skills and like force an impression on the investiture as it's receding to pull back Yumi. So Yumi now exists in a full physical form as a regular human. Basically, he reconstituted her and undid what the machine did to her and everybody else because she's a far more highly invested being. But there's just mechanics to all of that that just doesn't sit well with me. To me, it feels like he forcibly manifested a spren, like, or a cognitive shadow, I guess, with his impression of who Yumi was. So to me, it doesn't work well at all. It just feels like he made a investiture puppet or something like that. It doesn't. To me, there's like this disconnect between who she actually is and who that invested entity actually is. So even the conclusion of the love story just doesn't really work for me. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. Please let me know in the comments down below how you guys felt about this book. Let me know if a lot of these things I had issues with worked for you. Let me know. Please kind of give me something to latch on to change my perspective on it. Because I it's been kind of a trope that Brandon doesn't do romances that well. Like there's often a lot of criticism and stuff with it, but I like almost all of his romances better than this one. Like even like Elantris, where the two main characters basically never see each other until the end of the book, but their love makes more sense based on the things that they talked about, they spoke about in letters and stuff. That makes more sense. Suzabron and Siri, I really like that one. Like we see like what they like about each other. We really understand it. Ellen and Vin is a little Disney princessy love at first sight. Don't really care for it too much. Um, like even Adolin and Shalon, like even though that's like very arranged marriage, like that just so happens to work out, the way they know each other makes more sense to me. But again, some of these other romances have been developed over multiple books, so it's a different skill set in and of itself. So yeah, in the comments, let me know how did you feel about this book? What did you think about the romance? Do you think Brandon handled it better than I do? What do you think that I missed in it that like kind of left me unable to connect to it that well? Let me know about all that stuff in the comments down below. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and make sure you come back to check out part number 2 where we talk about the art, and part number 3 where we talk about the realmatics. So, as always, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.